today we're going to talk about the future of the test manager role and kind of what's going on there. I didn't really have a theme for this talk when I originally proposed it, and Jeff and James were like, hey, yeah, you can go ahead and do that talk. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh, it's the future, but it's really back to the future. All right. So as James said, I'm Jess Lancaster. I'm the testing practice manager here at TechSmith. I've been doing software testing since, I want to say somewhere around 96, 97, somewhere around that time frame. So a little over 20 years. Back in the days of waterfall and mainframes is when I started doing software testing. So it's been quite a run. I've spent probably actually more time as a test manager than I have actually as a tester. So that's kind of interesting. I started doing test management lead work around probably like 99, 2000, and then doing test management starting in 2003. So the bulk of my career has actually been as a test manager. So we're gonna have both kind of a conversation. I mean, I'll present some slides. I've got some points to talk about, but also I want us to have a little bit of a discussion because I want to see where the read is for the room. And so this is the first time I've done this talk, and it's probably a little rusty. We'll see how it goes. I'm looking to improve it because who knows, I may do it at a conference at some point. All right, back to the future of the test manager. Let's get into it. So first of all, what does a test manager do? Now this is going to be participation focused, so I will call these out as people do in the room, but just raise your hand and I'll call on you and tell me, what does a test manager do? Anybody? Clint.
It guides the growth of the testers.
Guides the growth of the testers. Okay. Yes.
Resource capacity and forecasting for the testers.
Resource capacity, all right, and determining if there's any future capacity needs for the team.
What was it?
Resource capacity. Anybody else? You could you maybe call out things that your current test manager does, or if you're a test manager, you could call out things that you do.
Just keep metrics.
Metrics. All right, keeper of the metrics. You can switch to the blue marker. That one might work better.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
What else?
Champion the QA department to the rest of the organization.
Champion the QA department to the rest of the organization. I like that one.
Hiring.
Hiring. All right. Traditional management responsibility. Think back to maybe a previous job. Was there something unique that a test manager did you'd like to call out?
Shelter the team from all the crazy corporate stuff.
Shelter the team from crazy corporateness. Okay.
Remove obstacles.
An obstacle remover or a bulldozer. We used to work with somebody. We used to call him the bulldozer because if something came up, he was on it. He would just push it out of the way. So yeah, the bulldozer. So far, I'm not really all that excited to have this job. So maybe you guys got some other things that these people do that. Anybody ever write test plans? Anybody ever been in a test management position, wrote test plans? Okay. Yeah, that's something that test managers often do. You can throw that on their test planning. Anything else you can think of? All right.
I mean, it's like administrative stuff. That's not like,
Administrative things?
yeah, like approving PTO and like,
Yeah, just general management responsibilities for employees. Yeah. One of the things I've done oftentimes as a test manager is contract management, whether it's tools or vendors or employee contracts, other things like that.
So like third-party contracts?
Yeah, that's good. Anything else you want to add to the list before we move on?
Go to meetings for everybody.
Go to meetings for people. I have done that many a time. All right. Well, let's move on, and we'll talk a little bit about back when I was a test manager. And when I use the term test manager, I'm not a test manager right now. I have a very different role than what a traditional test manager would be. So for the sake of this discussion, I'm going to use the term traditional test manager, right? I mean, a lot of organizations have had people in test management roles, and they just keep the same title and the same responsibilities, but the organization moves from waterfall to agile, and that is a very different role. And I've been through that transition and had that experience. So back in my waterfall days, I had an independent QA team that was separate from the development teams, and I managed those people. I oversaw those people. Oftentimes I could be found in a cubicle at the end of a row of those people, and I would stand in my slightly enlarged cubicle and look and gaze upon the testers as they would be testing. There's a few of them here in the room that worked with me then, so they know how that worked. And we were independent. We sat in our own area. We walked uphill both ways to meetings. Thank you for that laugh. We were separated from the developers. We wrote 1 to 3 test cases as expected based on the list of requirements that the business analyst came and dropped off all of those papers, and we would go through those papers and we would write test cases on those. And then we'd take those test cases after we gave them the feedback, and we would load all of those test cases into a big old test case management system, and then we would take those test cases and we would run them on the system, and we would put passes and fails, and we would log the bugs, and we would get our percentages of pass cases. And when we arrived at some number in excess of 90, we would say it's good enough and ship it. And that would be the end of that phase that I would project manage as a test manager. So as soon as the developers came along and they said, we have done all of the coding, we have done all of our work, we have now dropped it into your test environment, it is now yours. Auf Wiedersehen, goodbye. Have a good time for the next 3 months while you slog through your test cases. And eventually months, even after those 3 months, because projects would invariably get delayed due to missing integrations or other things, we would say we have passed this many tests, and the cases are good, and everything looks good, the plan is fulfilled, and we're ready to ship it. And we would drop it onto the production team, and they would then go and put it out. So that was a lot about what I would do as a traditional test manager. I went to project meetings. I would track test cases. I would project manage that test phase, report on test cases passing. I would remove obstacles as best I could, make sure the environments were suitable for testing. So those were a lot of things I did back when I was a test manager. It's important for us, as we're talking about the future of the role of the test manager, to really understand what's going on with the role of the tester. Because if you're managing those people and their job is changing, somehow your job is going to be changing as well. So what's happening to the role of the tester? Well, a couple of things that I think are happening to the role of the tester is that there are advancements in technology, and there are advancements in software development lifecycle changes, things that we're doing differently. Agile practices, as companies adopt agile practices, those are really changing the role of the tester. And we're finding that it's changing the role of the test manager as well. Roles are more blurry than they've ever been. So while you can have a person that has a testing role, they're probably doing a lot more things on that team than just testing. I mean, testers I work with here, a lot of them are working closely with support, reproducing issues that come through. They'll work with the developers. Sometimes they'll sit in on code reviews. They'll coordinate team-based testing activities. They will work with the release process. I mean, they're doing a lot of things that maybe in other organizations may be a specified individual role. So roles are blurring. There's a greater focus on competency, a little bit less on the role, but do you have the skills required to be able to do the job that we need you to do in the organization? Moving from independent teams to integrating testers into agile projects, that's really different. Because having this identity of a testing department or a team when everybody's matrixed in and separated out and working with development teams, that's a really hard thing to start to reconcile. And so that's a change for people that worked on independent QA teams. And new skills are needed. There's new techniques such as pairing with others, automation, specialized advanced skills like security, all kinds of other new types of testing that are coming along. So those are really some things that I see happening to the role of the tester. And a quote I grabbed from one of the articles that I was reading based on this was some comments about Lisa Crispin, who wrote with Janet Gregory the book Agile Testing, and the other book More Agile Testing, said it's a good idea to focus on being the best tester possible, trite as that may sound. It's important to remember what testers do well that no one else does. Bring your excellent testing skills with you and remember to make testing a team problem. This is a big challenge for organizations when they're moving from more of a traditional waterfall model to where it's, well, that phase, that team, you can point to the people that own testing. And when you are matrixed in and you're working on an agile team, the team needs to own testing. And that's a real hard paradigm shift for a lot of people to get through, because as a tester, you may not be running all the tests. You may not be doing all the testing. The team needs to start owning the testing. And so you may find yourself in a role where you're starting to facilitate more activities on that team for everyone to start owning testing. And it's definitely a paradigm shift for teams. So that's a little bit about what's happening to the role of the tester, and so how does that affect test managers? Well, my good friend and prognosticator of the future, Matt Heuser, said in an article where he wrote about the future of software testing, he said, the question for testers today is not if the role will exist, because James Whitaker did a talk, I think it was in 2012, called Test is Dead. And I mean, testers were pretty much running in the streets. You know, the sky is falling, if you remember when he did that talk. Matt has said, it's not if the role will exist, it's if testers are willing to make the investment in remaining relevant. So as testers, we can't really cling to and hold on to the way that things used to be. We've got to embrace the future and what our organizations need from us. And when they're changing development methodologies and when new things come up like DevOps, we need to find a way, well, how does testing work with this? Let me do some reading, let me do some research, let me try some things and figure out how this is going to fit. He said, for example, the ability to spot problems in production, risks and requirements, or a combination of changes that could destabilize the system are all critical. So he's saying that testers have this like unique perspective and this ability to add value to a team and to a project. So he said really rely on those, but remain relevant and develop your skills and be what your team needs you to be. All right. The evolution of the role from waterfall. So in the book Agile Testing, Lisa Crispin says, if you are a QA manager, be prepared to help your testers overcome their frustrations with moving from defined sequential stages to fast-paced iterations where they perform widely varied tasks on any given day. Help them adapt to the idea that testing is no longer a separate activity that occurs after development, but that testing and coding are integrated activities. Think about that statement. That is a very powerful statement. This is the paradigm shift that I'm talking about when you're moving from waterfall to agile. Is very different. It's not like you are a tester and you have a phase. And what oftentimes I see is organizations make this move to agile, and they don't really like upend their testing. They don't really look at it through a whole new lens and really change the way that they're doing their testing and make it a team-owned thing, because they still feel like that we're going to have this phase and it's going to be done. And you can notice that through development cycles. If you have a separate testing phase and you're doing Agile, you're really doing waterfall. So help the testers adapt to the idea that testing is no longer a separate activity. It's integrated. So I'll talk a little bit more in a couple minutes about what I mean based on this quote. So I want to take a moment and talk about what are some of the pressures on the role in Agile. So what pressures have you seen or challenges have you seen if you're a test manager, or for your test manager in your organization? What pressures have you seen or challenges have you seen on the role of the test manager in Agile? I've got a couple of mine, but I'm not going to show you mine until you tell me yours. Clint.
I have not seen this personally, but I have seen it a lot in the larger sphere of the software development world, where we focus on automation in testing. The automated tests sort of become reified as like the way that they do testing, and once that happens, then there's no longer a perceived need for a tester who's not just creating test automation, which is basically a developer.
Okay. I'm trying to think about how best to restate that. So with the advent of test automation and addition of it, there's little perceived need for a tester.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep, that's certainly a challenge.
Another one is building relations with different groups if they are separate.
Building relations with different groups if they are separate. Okay. One challenge that I had when I went from being in a waterfall environment to actually coming at TechSmith and working in Agile was I dragged a lot of those test manager preconceived notions with me, and I thought, well, I need to go to all the meetings that all the teams have. Can't do it. You can't do it. You get just such a thin slice of what's going on that team, and to be able to understand what they're dealing with and what they're going through. And when you've got, I don't know how many pods or teams we have right now, but it's too many to go to. It's too hard to keep context on what every team's doing. Yes.
Lack of visibility, like as a result of what you're saying, you can't go to all those meetings. So how would you maintain a handle on everything that is happening?
Okay. So how do you maintain a handle on everything that's happening, because you can't be everywhere? Like you could almost if everybody was sitting there and working under your purview.
Well, does that kind of contribute towards just general, like, learning how to manage a matrix management type scenario? If you have your resources loaned out to a pod and somebody else is kind of managing the day-to-day, and it's a learning that new management style and making sure that you're, as the manager, providing value to your associate, but not trying to reinvent the wheel in the project side. That gets too much to handle. Right.
Okay, so just to restate for the recording, learning how to manage in a matrixed environment where you may not be able to see the people in action and be able to be in depth on that project. Okay? Any other challenges for that role in Agile?
Testers are no longer formally reporting to the test manager.
Testers no longer formally reporting to the test manager. That happens in a lot of organizations. Yep. They can when they put people into a matrixed environment, some companies have gone to the point where it's not really matrix, but it's totally decentralized, and testers report to leads or other managers on the team that may not be testing focused. That happens a lot. So it's kind of like, it makes me think of well, I don't know what we're going to do with the testers now. We don't really need a test manager, right? Because they're all working on these teams. Well, we'll talk about that in a moment. Other pressures or challenges?
I guess having the team still, the QA group actually still stay like connected, even though they're all within their agile teams.
Okay. There's this I don't know, almost like hurting that testers feel that they're distributed. And so when they used to work together very closely, they had those close relationships. But now that they may be on a pod by themselves or on a team by themselves or a couple of them, they're kind of more disconnected from the collective. And so their identity can be challenging for them, for sure. And that can be challenging for the manager as well. Anything else? Any other challenges? All right. A few that I had. The first one is dealing with self-organizing teams. So if the teams are more self-organizing, that can be a little bit more challenging. If an organization moves to the point where their teams, they're allowed to kind of self-organize and work on what they want to, that can be a real challenge for a person in a test management role when they're doing some of the capacity planning and other things like that. And I've struggled with that as well, where you allocate a certain amount of capacity for testing on a program or a team, and they self-organize into a way that is maybe not very efficient, or they have some challenges in the way that they've kind of stacked the work. Self-organizing teams can be a challenge. Teams that are self-managing. So, well, why do we need a test manager if we've got managers that are already on that team? And some organizations, as I said, have gone to that model where they just have a lead for a team and they're managing everybody no matter what role on that team. That can be a real challenge for the test manager. Uncertainty of where they fit in. That's a real big challenge. Like, where do I fit in Agile? I got to try to figure out, like, how can I add value to the organization and do what they're asking me to do if this model is very different? And that can be some trial and error, trying to figure out, like, how best do you fit in? Because you might go to a team meeting, but you're not working on that team. You may be managing somebody on that team, but there's nothing for you to do there. You're not a part of capacity. May not be a real big reason for you to be there at that meeting. So, and what are you contributing if you're just there and just observing? Pushing down responsibilities. This is like along with the self-organizing, self-managing team, it's taking some of those responsibilities that the test manager had and pushing them down on the team for the team to own those things. So there's a lot of things that I used to do, like test planning. I remember writing test plans and handing them off to people and saying, this is what we're going to do on this project. And then I would move on to the next project and people would just take care of that stuff. Well, I don't do that anymore. It would be really hard for me to do. Besides, I don't want to be doing all the planning for everybody, and I don't have the context that everybody else does that are working on that team. So it's very hard for me to do that. So having people that are on that team own the work is really essential in Agile. All right, and the rise of the generalist. So this happens a lot on teams where people are a bit more generalized rather than specialized, and rather than have very, very specific skills, people have multiple capabilities that they're bringing to the team. And how do you manage that when there may be developers or other roles on the team that have maybe some significant experience in testing and may participate to a deeper level in testing, or testers that may have experiences in other areas and they can contribute in different ways on that team? Yes?
Another one that came in was testing practices start to diverge.
Testing practices diverge. Okay. Yeah, that could be interesting too, is because you could have a team where maybe the testers are taking on some automation, maybe the developers are taking on some certain testing responsibilities, or practices are changing up, so for sure. So this was interesting. As you're looking at the role of the test manager, people say, well, I don't know if I really want that role. I don't know if I really want to be one of those people. What's kind of interesting, the test manager is number 22 on Glassdoor's top 50 jobs for 2017. Top 50 jobs for 2017. I'm like, I really want to know where they got this data from, because apparently there's just a fair number of jobs open with it, and they had some details on job satisfaction rates and other things related to the job role, but I thought that was pretty interesting. So certainly, if you look at even a test engineer or a tester role, those still rank really high on job boards as well. So to me, it's just really interesting to look at that's roles that are going through a lot of change. You've seen Microsoft and Yahoo. Yahoo got rid of all their testers. Microsoft did something where they had kind of test engineers in between like traditional QA testers and the developers, and they kind of eliminated those roles and have done some changes with QA. There's large organizations that are doing interesting things with testing. Google, last I heard, creates like this artificially small market of testers so that the teams will own their own testing. They create a fixed market for testers. They don't have enough testers to go around every team. So that's kind of interesting. That's one way that they've forced teams to own quality. Different organizations, larger organizations, have done different things, but it's just really interesting to me that this job is still very desired, very fulfilling, even through all the changes that they're going through. All right, so let me tell you about a couple of things that I've done. I'll be mindful on the time here, and just kind of get into a few of these things. So in my transition from a test manager to more of we call it a practice manager here, but it's really a combination of kind of like a test manager / coach. One of the things that we did here is we promoted testers to team leads to push down responsibilities to the team level. So previously I had everybody reporting to me, which gave me about this much insight into what they were doing. And pushing down those responsibilities and having the teams be a little more self-managing by having leads that are both like player coaches, like they are managing the people, but they're also there to be able to coach those practices on a much more team level. That's one of the things that we've done. For me, it meant more coaching and less managing. So I would spend time coaching people a bit more. Well, how do you think you should handle it? I'm not going to write the test plan for you, but here's some resources that I've used. Here's some things that I've done. Why don't you try this? Why don't you tell me the level of comfort you feel with this, and I can help you work through it, right? So it's a little bit more coaching, and feedback goes along with that as well. I'll let go of some micromanagement tendencies to embrace empowering others. Stopped, as I said, writing and handing off test plans. This can be really challenging because then you start to feel the lack of identity if there's certain things that you aren't doing anymore as a manager by empowering others. But you know what? I'll tell you this. The true sign of if you're doing a good job handing off responsibilities is, would anything really suffer that much if you were gone for, say, 3 weeks or a month? I think in my case, I don't think a lot of teams would not stop working. They would keep doing what they're doing. If I take a 2-week vacation, pretty much everything's fine. So you can say, oh, you're getting obsolete. Maybe, I don't know. But my goal is to have teams that are, self-sufficient and don't need to have me around to make all those decisions for them. I became what I call a self-proclaimed shepherd of the guild, so to speak, promoting learning, connecting problems to solutions, and evangelizing testing practices. So we would work on team-based testing practices. We would do different learning sessions, empowering others, giving them responsibilities that maybe I used to previously have. And that kind of goes along with that. When the testers are existing on different teams, they need to have people or a test manager or somebody that's like kind of the player coach, kind of helping the whole group move forward, kind of doing some vision casting and talking about what's really important rather than making decisions for them. Supported team members where and when they needed. If somebody says, hey, my laptop's not working, let's get this fixed. How can I help you? How can I serve you? Testing for them to help increase my empathy. So this is something that I started doing is testing with the team. So if a team goes through a team-based testing cycle, I like to jump in and where I can and help test and be part of that capacity. Find bugs, because even though I'm a test manager, I still love testing. I still really enjoy it. So I want to have some time where I can get in there and test. And so whether it's been a mobile app or Snagit or some of the other teams, I'd like to jump in and say, hey, I'm working for you for the next couple of days. What can I do for you? Because that builds empathy, right? I can identify with the challenges and struggles that they're going through. Practicing patience, because change takes time, and also being what the organization needs from me. So maybe the organization, as they're going through some changes, they have certain needs that wouldn't necessarily traditionally be a test manager responsibility, but maybe they're saying, hey, we need you to participate in this. We need you to help us out with this. So just being relevant for what your organization needs from you. All right. Test manager and test coach. These are two things that could probably struggle and maybe war against each other a little bit. So Katrina Clokey, who has written a lot, she wrote a book on, an ebook on testing in DevOps. She's got a blog that's really great. Her name's Katrina Clokey. So if you haven't checked out any of her stuff, I really would suggest that you do that. She's done a lot of testing, test coaching, and test management. And she put up this grid, basically, of the difference between a test manager and a test coach. So in Agile, you hear a lot about coaches. And this is something that's come up where, hey, there's now these test coach roles that have emerged. And this is kind of, I think, something that we're going to see in the future a lot more of. So a test manager was traditionally more hierarchical, centralized ownership of testing. There was this very obvious defined testing community that they led. They would drive testers, focus on improvement. They would be a domain expert, an escalation point for the testers, and they would do things like more so registering testers for training. That was more traditional. She made this chart of what she sees as the traditional test manager. But a coach is more agile and focused on cross-team work. So a coach oftentimes really isn't as focused on the capacity for line work. Like they may not actually even have any cards that they're estimated on or assigned to them. They may just go and go between teams and help and assist and guide and give feedback and work across those teams. There's more a distributed ownership of testing. They help to foster the community. They may be working with people to help them gain the practices, practice adoption, help them with improving their skill sets. Serving the testers, like what are the needs that are there, moving from more driving to serving. Testing improvement focus would still, it's not just focused on the individual, but what are we doing on the team to improve our testing, right, and advancing that. Being more of a testing expert rather than a domain expert, continuing to be an escalation point, but not just for the testers, but for what's going on with testing within the teams, and creating and delivering training. So they would oftentimes do a little bit more of the training and help with the adoption of those practices within the organization. And when I look at this list and think about my role, I'm like looking at these items and I'm like, yeah, this is a lot of what I end up doing, both coaching and managing. One of the things that's kind of interesting here, we put leads in place, and our leads are doing a little bit of both of this, right? They have some responsibility for individuals and their career development and guidance, but they're also focused being a little bit more on those teams and kind of guiding and leading. So you can read more about the article, and I've got a link at the end of the slides, which will post these slides. There's article links to all these quotes and where all this stuff's at. All right, we'll kind of get in here and kind of wrap this up. The future is now. So really when we say what is the future of the test manager role and kind of some of the future of testing, it's happening right now. So we really can't look and say, oh, this is what I think it's going to be like, because a lot of the things that we would have said this will probably happen in the future, that stuff is already happening now in lots of organizations, and you go to any conference and you'll start to see this kind of stuff emerge. So what does a test manager need to do and start doing now? They need to focus a lot on leading the upskilling of testers, whether it's technical skills, advanced testing techniques, new testing methods, the adoption of Agile and figuring out how testing is best going to work in that. This is something the test managers need to start working on now. Advancing testing within other areas of the organizations, like, well, how is testing working with the devs? Like, how are they doing their unit testing, and how does that affect with what we're doing in traditional QA that's now moved into Agile? What kind of testing are we doing in DevOps, and what's going on with the build systems, and how is the testing going on there? So it's moving away from that tester focus to more of a testing across the team and the org focus. Being a connector and a replicator, so taking cross-team or cross-project successes and multiplying them. I can't tell you the number of times somebody comes into my office and says, hey, I'm having this problem with whatever, you name it, whether it's like how the team is dealing with bugs or how we're doing bug triages or whatever it is. And I can almost always say, you need to go and talk with so-and-so because it's working on their team. Go find out how they're doing it because they've really got a new method and I think it's working really great for them. So it's really about being a connector between those teams and understanding what's going on in the teams and how the practices are working. So I can't tell you about all the work that all the teams are doing, but I have a pretty good read about the practices that are going on in the teams and helping to bring those practices. If something's working well on one team, let's see if we can replicate this on the other team and spread those across the organization. Being a handoff reducer or eliminator. So that's what we've saw. There's lots of handoffs through traditional testing and through traditional waterfall life cycles. So we want to look at finding ways that we can reduce those handoffs of this is going to this team and to this team to this team, and we're waiting on this, and we want to do what we can to kind of really reduce that. The rise of the test coach and focusing on the coaching of testers. I already mentioned that. Figuring out how testing works best in your organization. So this is a challenge for test managers, and they really need to embrace this. Okay, what is going on in the industry, but also how do we make that relevant within our organization? So what challenges are our organization dealing with, and how do we have testing work best in it? Keeping the discipline relevant within the organization, that there will constantly be changes and challenges that come with keeping testing relevant with the organization. And a lot of that comes with the loss of that identity as a team and like a separate testing team and managing that team to when it's matrixed in, it can be really challenging. So keeping the discipline relevant within the organization. And with roles blurring, there are more hats to wear. It looks like I forgot to put more on there, but different hats. So I find myself getting involved with like the build team on what we're doing for continuous integration, and the tests that are running there and the metrics, what's going on there, different quality aspects across the organization, DevOps, what's going on with DevOps, and how is testing, working in there and being relevant there. So there's just lots of changes and challenges that come along with that. And I think that ultimately what I would sum it up as is be what your organization needs you to be as a test manager. That may mean your title kind of changes. That may mean your role changes some, but you've got to be just open and willing to accept those challenges, but also focus a bit on education. What's going on in the industry? What's happening with that job role? And bring that in the organization and help educate others on what you see your role as, and really focusing on improving that. All right, that is the end of my slides and my comments. Are there any questions, comments, quips, quibbles? Anything anybody has? Yes?
You have QA leads within your agile team?
We have, like, let's use Camtasia, for example. Clint's the test lead on Camtasia. He works on a pod, but he's also got a certain amount of his time that's dedicated to managing the testers on the Camtasia. It's like a program team. How many pods are there? 4 or 5? 4 pods. So 4 separate groups of devs with testers, and they have a designer that works with pretty much a couple of designers that probably work with the whole team. So he manages those testers across those different pods, if that makes sense, within one program.
And then actively, you are actively testing within one of those groups?
Yeah, I'm the lead tester for one of the pods, and then there are also a tester assigned.
Yeah, Clint said he actively tests on one of the pods, and there are testers that exist on those other pods. And most of that happens, it's pretty self-managing. I don't go to Clint and tell him, you need to put this tester on this pod and that tester on that pod. I work with him on, this is what we're allocating from the organization's perspective. Use it how best you see fit. So that gives that team a bit more autonomy to be able to be flexible and really meet the needs of the program. Other questions? Oh, come on. I didn't tell you everything. You got to have some questions.
Going from the waterfall method to that agile method?
Is it on? I don't know. So our company is just now going from the waterfall to the agile method, and I'm
Okay.
wondering how you facilitated the approval process of requirements and testing. We're still trying to figure that out.
How do you facilitate the approval process of requirements? It's really interesting because we don't really have a, like, I wouldn't say like formal approval process. It's more so like the testers, well, Three Amigos is a really good example of that. If you ever heard of a Three Amigos meeting, it's where a tester, a designer, a business analyst, and a developer get together, and they sit together, and somebody usually brings, like a business analyst would bring to that meeting like a user story or acceptance criteria or requirements, whatever the case may be, and they would do a group review of that and would give feedback on it, and it would be updated. They would kind of do, you could have a sign off with that, but just look up Three Amigos meeting, because that's really what that's designed for in an agile context. Go ahead.
We also just went through some SAFE training here at TechSmith, and the biggest thing that stuck out to me is a sign-off is at the end when you completed whatever you define as done, and then you have the business owner come in and look through what you've done, and you can do a demo kind of for them so they see all the functionality and where the quirks are or whatever, and then they sign off at that point or not. But it's at the end, it's not during the or that particular feature, that stage in production. Or
Yeah, I think that's more of like the acceptance, but the business owner is really involved in that user story up front and understanding what's on the cards as far as the acceptance criteria to make sure that that's true. They've done those reviews ahead of time.
Well, and I can share, so I think we need to look at just,
Ours is very much organizational centric. We've created a culture that makes it extremely difficult to embrace agile. So all of our governance processes require those sign-offs up front, and our release management process and tracking how code is built and deployed it's all very interconnected, which makes it difficult for a traditional agile, which would allow us to get that buy-in at the acceptance phase and then make a decision of when we move to production. So we kind of do everything a little backwards.
I've often seen it be challenging in financial and insurance organizations to really embrace Agile wholeheartedly, because they view it as, well, it's not as defined, and they're like, well, these are just different optional things that you could do or whatever. It's easy come, easy go, that kind of stuff. And what I've seen some organizations do is they actually will pull a group out and get them out of that culture and out of that the processes of the way they're going, and start small with one group that's unencumbered by the processes of the organization. They can be a little bit freer and be able to adapt and adopt. And it can be real challenging in some organizations to be able to move the needle on the culture. And to say that you're just going to go in and you're just going to rip out all the existing processes and put a new one in place is hard, because my analogy that I use for that is like, it's like my mechanic working on my car while I'm driving down the road. That's very hard to do. So, any other questions? Yes.
So as a test manager of today, do you see yourself as maintaining a vision or goals for testing as the organization, or do you see a lot of splintering down to individual teams or smaller leads?
Yeah, I would say we've had leads in place since about the middle of last year, and I think it's going really well for us. And what I'm starting to see emerge is they have needs within their own areas that they're starting to identify some goals that they want to set for their individual areas. And it's kind of interesting. My role is kind of, I feel like, changing a little bit, because we have a new CTO that we've had for probably the last little over a year. And there's more aspects of a quality focus that he wants me being involved in the organization. So I see I see that changing for me a little bit too. So that's one thing I was kind of mentioned as far as being relevant to what your organization needs from you, and being focused in that area. Whereas previously I would probably focus very heavily on some of the testing practices, but now there's a group of leads that can really help champion those with their teams. So, anything else? All right, well, thanks for taking the time to come out today. I'll be around if anybody has any questions. Feel free to stay and chat if you want. All right, thank you.